Hello and welcome back to Ready Steady Play. And I'm making this video because Carson City, the second game from Xavier Georges, is back on Kickstarter, except it's on GameFound now. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the game and why it's one of my favorites of all time. So the game is Carson City. This is actually the Big Box edition from the 2015 Kickstarter campaign. I bought this back when it was on Kickstarter at the time. I'm making this video entirely thanks to our supporters on Patreon to let you guys know about the game, why I like it so much, and whether this is the right choice for you. Is this a game you should go out and get on GameFound now that they're reprinting it? The Big Box edition has been out of print for a while. So has the original 2009 release, as well as the expansion and all the various bits as well. So it's quite hard to find. So if you do want the game, this is probably the best way to get it. But, you know, it is a very interesting game that's probably not for everyone. So why don't you stick around for the video and see whether or not this is something that you should be getting excited about. As I mentioned earlier, it's designed by Xavier Georges, who's been whose name has come up recently because of Carnegie. He's the designer of Carnegie. He also co-designed Black Angel and Troyes with Trois. I'm gonna get all my French pronunciations horrible for this entire video. But he designed those games with Sébastien Dujardin and Alain Orbain. But Carson City and Carnegie are his own designs. He also designed Ginkopolis, and he designed, his first game was Palace Royale, which I haven't actually had a chance to play. But Ginkopolis is a lot lighter than Carnegie and Carson City, and Carnegie is not at all like Carson City, really. So the original box actually played 2 to 5. The big box plays up to 6. I've played it at 3, 4, and 6. Carson City is a game set in the Wild West, and you are a group of cowboys that has just shown up at Carson City, which at the time might not have been called Carson City yet. I think it was named that in the mid 1800s, and it was around the time when there was a huge mining rush. Like, they discovered silver, I think it was silver specifically, but gold and silver in the mountains, and so lots and lots and lots of people showed up at Carson City in what would become the state of Nevada. Then the city prospered, and there was a sort of development boom, and that's what you're doing in the game. You're taking part in that development boom, and you're the head of this gang of cowboys. So just like the theme suggests, you know, it's the Wild West, it's quite chaotic, and so at its heart, it's kind of a heavy Euro game, but there's a lot of player interaction, and there's a lot of potential to be quite mean. It is absolutely, at its heart, a heavy Euro game of sort of economic management. Effectively, what you're doing, it's 4 rounds long, and every round you're going to be building buildings in Carson City, and then you'll be earning money from those buildings. So they'll produce a bunch of money, and then what you want to do is buy victory points with that money, and then the round will end, and after 4 rounds of that, the game is over. So at its core, it's a worker placement game. There is an element of sort of spatial planning as you develop the town, but it's mostly about other people and what they're doing. So the game requires you to be quite on the ball in terms of what you think your opponents are going to be doing, and just player interaction in general. There's an awful lot of player interaction in this game, and when I get to the rules overview, you'll see just exactly how that works. So the game is 4 rounds long, and after the 4th round, the game will end, and most people will get most of their points during the game by spending money, but there are other small ways to get points during the game, and then at the end of the game, you'll get some points for the land that you've developed. So it's going to be land that you've bought and has something on it. Now, occasionally you might buy a landmark like a mountain, in which case you're just going to get points for that anyway, but typically it will be a house or a building that you've developed, and so you'll get points for that at the end of the game, as well as you can exchange your leftover money for points too at a terrible exchange rate. And so in those ways, it does resemble a pretty typical Euro. Now, it probably takes about 2 hours to play. I think if you're playing at 6, it probably takes longer. There is a lot of scope for analysis paralysis in this game, particularly because quite a lot of it becomes chaotic and unpredictable. So I think, it's, but, if everyone's across the game and knows it quite well, it can be played pretty quickly. I'd say it's probably also about a half-hour teach, probably longer if people are not super familiar with the hobby in general. Let's set the game up and I'll take you through a rules overview. This is not going to be a comprehensive teach because there's a lot of rules in this game. So I'm just going to tentpole the main parts of it and give you a real idea about how it plays and how it functions, so that when I talk about the game in the second part of this video, the body of the review, you'll understand and have some context for what I'm talking about. So here we've got a very basic setup for 3 players for Carson City. I've only put out the red players player pieces for illustrative purposes. It doesn't really matter. What I'm going to do here is just give you a quick overview of the game and exactly what it is, so that you can have some idea about how it plays and decide if you want to get involved. It is fundamentally a worker placement game and a economic management game, but you'll see where the wrinkles come in to make that interesting as I go through this explanation. So the game is 4 rounds long, and you can see a round tracker up here in the form of this marker, which is going to move to the left at the end of each round. And so we'll be here in the final round, and at that point, at the end of the 4th round, the game will end. A round consists of 3 central phases. The first phase, everybody picks one of these personalities to be, which will give you a special power for this round. The second phase, everyone takes their cowboys and places them onto spots on this track up here, or spots onto the board down here. And where you put them obviously will allow you to do different things and mean different things, and I'll give you an overview of that in just a minute. And in the final phase of the round, we'll go along this track on the top of the board here, triggering each of these spaces, which indicates a different action that needs to be resolved. And when we get to the end here, that's the end of the round. The token will move on, players will get some cowboys, and we'll go again until the final round, when we'll do final scoring and the game is over. In order to understand Carson City a little better, it's important to understand the map, which is here. Now this map has been randomly generated. It includes the center of Carson City, which is this house, and the roads around it. You can see we've put out 9 mountains as well. And each player, our 3 players, the red, blue, and green player, have picked 2 parcels of land to own. And so they've taken these parcel ownership tiles here and put them out onto the board with a little arrow at the top. That's to indicate that this player now owns this parcel of land. It should be noted that during the game you can buy any parcel of land on the board that a player doesn't own, but at the start of the game you can only claim empty spaces. This means later on you can purchase things like mountains and also the center of Carson City itself. This also gives you a good indication of how we're going to put things out on the map, which is to say that the parcels of land will contain things like mountains, and later on they'll also contain buildings, and we'll have roads which exist on the lines between the spaces. So as Carson City develops, we'll be purchasing building tiles, and we'll want to build these onto the parcels of land that we own. The vast majority of buildings, when you build them, require you to build houses for the people that move to the town when you build the building. And these will need to be built on the road network. Most things need to be built on the road network so that people can access them. So here you can see a later game state where Carson City's begun to develop, and you can see a lot of buildings have been built. This might even be an end game state. This is quite developed. You can see we've got all these buildings out, we've got houses, and we can see how the road network has expanded as well. Players have bought up some of the mountains, and the blue player happens to own some of the houses as well. Over the course of the game, you'll be buying the parcels of land, and then you'll be building things onto them. You can also purchase parcels of land that have something on it already, provided no one else owns it. Now that's pretty core to the game. Each building has a series of numbers on it, which is the income the buildings can generate each round. There's also a shorthand in the corner here to remind you how the building makes money and also some of its unique characteristics, if indeed there are any. The general store earns money for each house in an adjacent spot. In Carson City, adjacent is both orthogonal and diagonal. In this case, the general store is only going to earn $3 because there's only one house. It's not a very good one for the green player. So ideally what you want to be doing is putting out the buildings in the places where they'll make the most money. For example, ranches want empty tiles around them. So this is a good spot for a ranch, and you can see they're also exempt from being on the road network. Mines want mountains around them, but they have to be neutral mountains or mountains that you own. And again, mines are exempt from being on the road network. At the beginning of the game, mines and ranches are a great way to make money. But as the game progresses and the board fills up, the ranches will lose their value, and as players buy the mountains around your mines, those are also going to diminish in value. So then you want to start thinking about the other buildings that can go into the town, like the general store that profits from houses nearby it, and the drugstore, which profits from your houses, neutral houses, and also any ranches that you own. You'll see that there's a great many buildings in the game, and learning how all the buildings work, thanks to this surprisingly good player aid, given its complexity. But learning how all these buildings interwork is vital to doing well at Carson City. But learning how all the buildings earn money is vital to doing well in Carson City. And here you can see all of the buildings in the game listed on this player aid. The vast majority of them require houses to be built and require the road network to be extended as well. And note that when you're building houses, that's just a free thing. You can just put out houses, provided you have spaces to put them in. One important thing to note as well is that in the second step of a round, when you're putting out your cowboys, you'll have some available cowboys here to put out. You don't have to play them all. You can pass earlier if you want to hang on to them, and you might want to hang on to them. But you'll also have some cowboys in an unavailable pool as well, much like in El Grande or something like that. These ones are in the supply, and you need to get them into your play area in order to use them. Now here's a really quick overview of this track. Here on the action track, you'll see there are two kinds of spaces, red spaces and beige spaces. The beige spaces are actions that you'll take if you put a worker on that space. And the red spaces are phases that everyone's going to get to do. So as we move through this track, we'll stop on these phases, everyone will do it, and then we'll keep moving along the track, triggering each space and resolving it for players with cowboys on the space. So these first four spaces just give you things. This one gives you some money if you need some money. It can also give you a horse if you're playing with that module. It's an expansion module. This one over here gives you 3 pistols. This one over here gives you 3 roads. Over here you get just 1 road, but it features this no guns symbol, which we're going to talk about in a minute when we get to the twist of this game. Over here, this is purchasing parcels of land. So this is where you'd find cowboys that you'd placed onto empty spaces, and you'd purchase the land that the cowboy is on. Now land costs $1 plus $1 for everything around it. So this land here is going to cost $4 because we're only counting things that actually exist. So the mountain, the house, and the building, $1 each plus $1 for the land, $4 for that parcel. And when the red player purchases this, they get to put out their marker to show that they now own it. So every player who's got a cowboy in an empty space on the map here will get to purchase that parcel of land. And then down here we've got the buildings. And this is a building track that's going to be refilled every round. If you've got a cowboy on one of these buildings, you can purchase it for the price shown below. And you can see they get cheaper as we move to the left, which means these ones are more competitive. Over here, we're going to get to build buildings. And this can include buildings that you purchased in a previous round, but didn't get to place. And then over here, you're going to earn money if you take this action. For every parcel that you have, you're going to get $2. Over here, for every gun that you have, you're going to get $2. And over here, you just throw 2 dice, sum them, and get that much money. So $7 for you here. And then down here, everyone's buildings are going to produce taxes. As we established earlier, the buildings are effectively little tickers. So this little arrow here is just marking its current value. And so when it's put on the board, you can just set that pointing at one of these numbers on the tile so you can quickly reference how much money that building is making. Of course, you'll need to keep updating it as the board state changes, but you count up all of your buildings on the board here, and in this phase you receive that much money. And now over here we're going to be earning victory points. So this is the final part of the board here, and here we're going to get 1 point for every 2 parcels of land that we have, and that doesn't matter whether they've been built on or not. Over here we're going to get 1 point for every 2 pistols we have. Over here we're going to get 1 point for each building that we've built. And then over here we can spend money for points. So this is a 5 for 1, 4 for 1, 3 for 1, and 2 for 1 exchange rate. And the savvy amongst you will have noticed that as the game progresses, these spaces become unavailable, making the money for points exchange rate crucially important as it becomes less and less attainable. Finally, after we've resolved all of that, we'll move into this final step, which everyone gets to do, which is simply spend 10 for 1 money. So this is a bad exchange rate. However, you're limited in the amount of money you can carry over round to round. So if you can't save it, you're going to have to spend it here on the less good exchange rate. So up here, we've got a turn order that we established at random. And then during setup in a snake draft, we went in and out as players put down 2 parcels of land. And then once that has happened, we're going to go to the first phase of the game, which is selecting a persona. And so you can see over here, we've got 7 personas. Now this is 7 recommended personas. These are numbered 1 to 7, and they're the ones the game recommends you start with if you haven't played before. The big box version comes with tons of personas, and each persona comes with a variant side as well that's red. So you can play with these in any combination that you want. Also, you'll always use 7 no matter on the player count. There'll always be 7 personas. Now, the player who's ahead on the track at the top of the board will choose a persona first, but after they've chosen, the player order will be re-established using the numbers on the persona tiles. So you can see this is persona tile number 1, so whoever picks this tile will be the first player going into the next phase. Each persona tile also has some information on the bottom. The first is this ability square that gives you a unique power. In this case, you'll unlock the unique Sheriff Meeple if you take the Sheriff tile. And at the very bottom there is some money. That's the money cap that you can hold over round to round. Remember here where you have to spend and you can only save a certain amount? The Sheriff can keep $20 between rounds and must spend everything else or lose it. So if our players have picked the Sheriff, the Settler, and the Mercenary, the Sheriff was picked by blue player will drop into first. Then the player who picked the Settler, say it's green, will drop into second. And finally, red player who picked the Mercenary will drop into last place for the next phase. And the next phase is worker placement. Each player starts the game with 3 cowboys in their reserve, but over the course of the game, you'll be given more cowboys round to round. So in round 2, you get 4 cowboys. In round 3, you get 5 cowboys. And in round 4, you get 5 cowboys as well. But you might also have cowboys in your reserve already. You don't have to place all of your cowboys in a given round, and you might get some back for use in later rounds. So let's find out how that works. In any case, in our newly established turn order, players will take turns putting cowboys onto the action spaces that they want to take. Now, remember that these red spaces do not have cowboys on, but they might have cowboys on the board. For example, if you want to purchase a parcel of land during that phase, you put your cowboy onto an empty space on the board in order to purchase that parcel of land. Income happens automatically. However, you can put your cowboys into other players' buildings in order to steal some of their income. Now, when a player passes, they'll drop back up here in the order that they pass. So the first player to pass will go into first position. The second player to pass will go into second, and so on. Now, this is important because this is going to be the order that players will draft the personas in next round. But additionally, this is also going to break ties. And we're going to talk about why that's important now. But this is going to break ties in favor of the leftmost person. So blue has the advantage on tie breaks this round. And that's where we get to what makes Carson City different in terms of a worker placement game with a different element. Because in most worker placement games, when somebody takes a spot, they've blocked it and you can't go in there. In Carson City, you can absolutely go in there and do the same action as someone else. And it doesn't matter if they're buying a building, if they're buying a plot of land. It doesn't really matter if somebody's already placed a cowboy in there, and everyone can go in there if they want to. If they're robbing you, you might want to go in and defend it. Or if they're robbing some valuable building, you might want a piece of the action as well. When multiple cowboys are placed in a space and we go to resolve that space, there's going to be a shootout. And the shootout is resolved by taking a die, and they're going to add to this 2 things. They're going to add the guns in their player area, and they're also going to add the total cowboys in their player area. Each player starts with 1 gun in their player area, But you can get more guns in your player area. For example, building ranches and mines will give you an extra gun. Building the prison will give you 2 extra guns. If you're the mercenary, you count as having 3 extra guns. And if you took this action at the arms shop, you'll count as having 3 extra guns as well. So when you roll your dice, you'll be adding 4 to your dice roll. And if you have any available workers in your player area that you didn't use yet, you'll also add those. So if red rolls a 4 here, then their total is 10. Everyone will roll simultaneously, and if there's a tie, it's broken in favor of the leftmost position here. The player who wins, let's say it's red, gets to take the action, and the players who lose will take their cowboys back. They'll go back to their available cowboy areas, and they'll aid them in future duels for this round, because now they have another cowboy available that they can add to their total, and next turn, they'll have an extra worker to put out on the board. If you remember our little shootout here as well for green's saloon profits, let's say green wins. That means that green will get all of their income from the saloon in the income step. Let's say red wins. They'll steal half of green's income rounded down. So in this case, the saloon is producing $25. So red's going to take 12 and add it to their income, and green's income is going to go down by to 13 for that building. So what you see now is how this game, which is a economic management Euro, suddenly becomes a cutthroat game with an enormous amount of player interaction. Now, there are, of course, some elements of risk and reward as well. You've got up here the no dueling spots, which won't be dueled over. So this is a safe way to get a road if you need it. Now, at the end of the game, you're going to get most of your endgame scoring from the city here. Any parcel of land you own with something on it, whether that's a building, a house, or a mountain, is going to be worth 2 points. You're also going to have an endgame exchange rate for money. Now, there's a little wrinkle here where at the end of the game, you have to cash out your money for points here. So you have to buy points at a 10-to-1 rate. But any money you save to bring into the end game scoring with you, i.e. at the end of round 4, any money you have left over, you can buy points at an exchange rate of 6-to-1. So slightly better rate there as well for points, but only with the money that you took over, which means that picking your persona tiles in the end game is still important. For example, the banker can take $120, which could be 20 points if they have all that money at the 6-to-1 exchange rate. But you can also see a central conundrum here. Do you spend all your money on points in the first round if you manage to secure this incredibly competitive space? If you do blow all your money, will you have enough left to build buildings over the next 3 rounds? Or will any gains you made here be lost as your engine stalls out because you have no money? Or will you just become a bandit and instead of trying to build your own buildings, just go and rob the buildings that everyone else is making? Now, in the big box version, there are 6 variations on the game as well. And some of them are from the original expansion. I don't know if some of them have just been added to the big box actually in the Kickstarter campaign. There's also some promos, but I think they're mostly these character tiles that just add more variation to the game setup. And they do add a lot of variation, and each tile's double-sided, so it's pretty wild. There's some suggested setups in the book, and you can make the game more or less mean and competitive, depending on which tiles you put out, however you want to do that. But the main modules, I'll just give you a brief overview of the sort of the 6 variants. We'll start by talking about the 2 biggest variants, the ones that sort of add the most to the game. And that's not to say that they're massive changes, just they have the most impact, I suppose. So there's a horses variant where each player is going to get one of these horse boards, and over the course of the game you're going to be able to acquire these horse meeples, and then you can assign them to positions on this horse board for extra actions. So then the second one is the Outlaws variant, where you've got these outlaws here, and they're going to be moving around Carson City and basically getting into people's buildings and stealing their money and all kinds of stuff. And so you have to fight them just like you fight the other players' cowboys as well. And then there are some smaller variants. There is a variant called Might is Right, which replaces the dice that you roll during the duel with these tiles. So everyone's going to have a hand of tiles, which are numbered 0 to 5. And you hold on to these tiles and you place one face down, and then everyone flips the tiles to work out their total score. This is supposed to give you a bit more opportunity for planning. The way what it kind of does is make you really have to prioritize your duels. I have mixed feelings about this variant, but it certainly adds a little bit of determinism to the game. Although realistically, you don't really know what anyone's got in their hand and what they're capable of. When you've played through all of the tiles in your hand, you then get to draw back up from the stack of discarded tiles.
There's also an alternate side of the board with a river on it, or you can use a set of tiles if you want to make your own river.
And this is just called the Carson River variant, and it just makes building a bit more limited, so it sort of forces players into different positions, and then players can also build bridges over the river and things like that. The river also has additional value for mines and stuff like that, and so it makes the ranches and the mines a little bit more dynamic as well. But then you play with fewer mountains on the board if you do put the river out, and nobody can buy the river, so they'll never own it. There's also the New Beginning variant, which is actually this pad here of sheets. And in the New Beginning variant, effectively everyone's given like a sum of money to use, and then they spend that money on stuff here. So this is really for players that have like quite a lot of experience with the game, but you can just go and tick off these boxes, and everyone does this in secret. So you just tick off the boxes on what you want to buy. So you do each row, so you're like, oh, I want to start with a bunch of extra cowboys. And then that costs like all of your money. You get $50 to spend, I think, in total. So that's 26. So you could start with one cowboy for $0, which is pretty wild. You could start with extra guns. You can start with extra roads. You can start with more parcels of land on the board, or you can start with just straight up some victory points. And then there's a bunch of different options down here you can pay for as well. And, you work out your total here as well. And then your money that you'll start the game with is going to be $50 minus everything you just spent. So this gives everyone really asymmetrical starts and lets you start to play into a strategy, but because this is picked in secret, you don't know what everyone's going to do. So the final variant is called the Kit Carson variant. It's absolute nonsense. Basically, during the worker placement step of the game, there's no order to placing your workers. The rule is you can put your workers out in real time. So it just people throwing workers onto worker placement spaces. And you can do as many as you like. You can go as quick as you like. The only rule is that you have to use one hand, and you can't hover over the board while you think. And then you're just putting the workers out as fast as you want. And the minute you're happy with what you've done, you just pass. And now you can't change your workers at all. So, you're vulnerable to people who want to jewel you or whatever. And the minute we get to like one person left, then they finish and it's over and they're in the last position. So that is total anarchy and requires people to know the game real well. Okay, so I hope that gives you a pretty good idea about what you get in the big box and how the game works. Obviously, there is this complex Euro-style situation at the core of the game, which involves managing your money as you are choosing actions up here and also picking roles. Your primary consideration here is, what am I doing this round? How do I want to play in turn order? How much money am I going to try to carry over? Are you going to build up a sort of an engine where you're trying to get out a lot of profitable buildings and manipulate the board down here? Or are you going to be maybe just building buildings that get you guns so you can become a real bandit and just rob everyone else, which is of course helpful because not only are you earning money, but you're taking money away from your opponents. At its core, you're thinking, how am I going to build this engine? Which actions am I going to take? All of that kind of stuff. And it's the introduction of this dueling element that gives it this intense player interaction that is quite unique for a Euro of this complexity. And I say Euro, but really it's not a very helpful turn of phrase. We say Euro because it is economic management and action selection, but it's under a layer of player interaction that's resolved through dice throwing, and obviously you can play the might is right variant if you want it to be a little bit more deterministic, but it's still pretty random. I have mixed feelings about both variants. I like the dice variant. I also like the Might is Right variant. And one of the reasons I like the Might is Right variant is not actually because it makes the combat more strategic, because I don't think it really does, but I actually like it because I think it makes players who are more in the mindset of a Euro game more willing to engage in duels. Because for me, the dueling is what makes this game come to life. It's what makes it feel like a Wild West game instead of just a city building game, and really makes the theme come out of the game and come to life. And it's what makes it interesting as well, because there's not a massive amount of resources in the game, so it's just money. That's all you've got going on here. It's just money, and that's it. And you need some roads as well, because roads, I mean, they're free to get. You just need to go to the spaces, but of course that's a worker for a road. This is a worker for 3 roads, which is better rate, but then might have to fight for it. So but a one road can open up a bunch of spaces and help you open up areas of the map. They're important, but you don't need resources to build them. So there's not that much complexity when it comes to managing the resources in the game, although there is a really excruciating decision around, do I put this money into acquiring parcels of land and buildings, or do I save it to try and buy points at the end of the round? And based on different player strategies as well, you'll see these different sort of these spots down here become more or less vicious in competition for them. But what the dueling does is it adds a real sense of tracking who's in the lead, who's got reading the board state, understanding the state of the game. And so what it does is it makes you a lot more invested in what every other player is doing. You have to be paying attention to what kind of strategy they're building towards. You have to be paying attention to what buildings they've got, how they might use those buildings to sabotage you. Maybe, you want to commit a worker to robbing them. It also makes the timing considerations on the worker placement aspect of the game really important too, because the position at which you pass in this round is going to be really important, because once you pass, you can't put out a worker to defend your buildings from people trying to rob you. You can't put out a worker to compete in a space that someone else is going to that's going to earn them a lot of points. And so it feels more like a very sort of competitive game where you have to be able to read the board state and understand what people are doing and get involved in those conflicts. And it makes all the timing considerations a lot more impactful as well, which I think is really, really interesting. I mean, that is, for me, what sets this apart and makes this game special. It's got that sort of relatively interesting crunchy Euro element that you can use to be mean. You might have, for example, a building like, let's take a look over here at this drugstore. So this drugstore over here is earning money for all the houses around it. Now, blue player is going to be raking in a ton of money from this townhouse here, which effectively counts as 2 houses because the area around them is totally built up. So the red player might come in and just buy up this land. Now that's going to be worth 2 points at the end of the game for them, and it's given them exclusivity on these houses, which means this drugstore is going to lose 2 of its income steps, which is $6. So it's going to go from 18 down to 12. So there's these sort of mechanical ways to be mean that don't necessarily involve dueling or fighting or anything like that. And actually you can see some of that in Carnegie as well later on, but where Carnegie just doesn't have the same kind of immediate opportunities to conflict with another player. In this, if you really want to stop a player doing something or really mess up their plans, just duel them. Put a worker out and have a go at them. Now, this is somewhat self-balancing because, the players who are, when they're defeated, they get their worker back, they can use it next round, and it counts as a gun for the rest of this round. But that's never a sure thing, and if someone's built up a lot of guns and they can just shoot down everybody, then, probably you shouldn't have allowed that to happen. At least not without building up your own firearms as well. Now, it's worth noting that this is also where a couple of the major drawbacks of this game come in. The first, I think, is that there's not a lot of low-level heuristics in this game. So it's hard for players to understand how to do well, and I'm not even that good at Carson City, and I've played it a whole bunch, but whether you can, I find, myself leaning into strategies that allow me to pivot quickly between different sort of points getting opportunities. But I think there are also strategies where you just focus on maybe like building up loads of buildings or acquiring, like really focusing on the gun stuff and trying to get lots of guns as well. I do think that it can be quite hard for players to know what to do or to know what to do well. And they can get a bit confused about how to start doing well. And because the game's only 4 rounds, it's really short and quite brutal. And so I think, it's the kind of game you really want to commit to playing again. Now, I've seen groups sit down who have never played this before and have an absolute great time with it, just shooting each other, sabotaging each other, and even if they do badly, they have fun being, vindictive and vengeful. But I've also seen players who are expecting more of a traditional board game get really frustrated, be unable to take any actions, and not really have a good experience. And I don't think that there's a lot of ways around that. You can give people a heads up. So if, say, this 2-for-1 exchange rate at the start's really, really good, that should be a really competitive space. Keep your eye on this building. This is going to be really important. Things like that. But ultimately, there's not sort of one thing that's really good advice. So if you say, for example, the drugstore is a really good building, players still need to figure out how to use it and do well with it. Likewise, the train station, which is a building that I quite often take out of the game, actually, is a building that's just worth a load of points if you can build a road that bisects the board, either horizontally or vertically. And that can be very competitive as well, but it can be quite hard to get that. And if players do get it, then everyone else is going to try to stop them getting the 3 roads, and then they might not be able to build the railway, and that's frustrating as well. So it really is the kind of game where it's almost like a sort of a chaotic energy where you have to be a bit more prepared for something that's a bit more of a wild experience and a bit less of a kind of deterministic Euro. It's not as, it is just as mean as Carnegie or a Splotter game as well, but it's more random, and that can be very frustrating. Particularly also in the last round where the cowboys that die, you'll never get a chance to use them again, and they're just worthless at the end. I mean, they still count as a gun in the final round for all of the jewels that you've got, but if you lose 4 jewels in the final round, that can be a real bummer. Fortunately, it's generally pretty short for a game this size and this meaty. It's generally 2 hours, maybe a bit under 2 hours. It is quite quick, but I just think like it can be quite like I think it's the kind of game that you'd want to bring to a group that will play it again. And I think that comes from the player interaction, this ability to sabotage people and pick on the leader and try to balance the board state as well. I mean, if you think and being able to read the board state obviously is a really important part of that. And in order to read the board state, you really kind of have to learn the game and know the game reasonably well, because it's not just about looking to see who has the most points in any given moment. Of course, that's helpful, but it's also about being able to look and see how much money are people earning, how many buildings have they got, all these kinds of things. But also, it's about being sort of able to pivot to different strategies. Don't lose sight of these other ways to make money and earn points and things like that. So I think this is the right fit for a group that are used to quite heavy Euros or who are also used to games that have quite a lot of player interaction and quite like the idea of seeing a game that melds both together in a way that's quite interesting and a bit unique as well. Um, Personally, I like to play it with the Might is Right variant with people that haven't played before. I also think, but it depends again on the group. Like if you're playing with people that quite like war games and quite like throwing dice, to resolve conflict and don't mind that kind of random element, then absolutely the dice is the way to go. But if you're playing with people that are more Euro minded and might find, the prospect of a duel quite off putting because it's too random, then the Might is Right variant is a way of sort of convincing them that it's less random than it really is, even though it's still pretty random. So I think because of the nature of the game, where it is this sort of interesting melding of these two elements. It is a little harder to get to the table or find the right group for. I think it sits better with much more experienced gamers just because it melds these sort of different areas of gaming in a way that is quite vicious and quite mean and rewards familiarity with the hobby. Um, but I think what it presents is a really interesting dynamic that I don't see very often, and it's still a lot simpler to play than something like Food Chain Magnate or Carnegie, which are both quite heavy Euros that are quite mean. It also does a lot of things right. Like, a lot of the modules are interesting. I think that they're fun. They change up the game in a way that's quite good. I also find the game incredibly replayable, probably due to the incredible number of varieties here with the persona tiles, but also just because of the dynamicism of the player interactions. Like, it makes it a different and intriguing game every time, even if it's just fundamentally the same thing. You know, I think that the replayability that comes from heavy player interaction is often overlooked as a factor for replayability. You know, the early start variant is really interesting. I don't tend to play with the outlaws because I find that they add a little bit too much down extra time to the game, and they can also be quite punishing for people that are not especially familiar with the game. So, but you know, I'm excited to explore the modules. I haven't played more. I haven't tried the Kit Carson variant very much at all. We did enjoy it when we played it, but it adds a significant amount more like chaotic nonsense to the game. Um, so you know, if that's something you like, then that's great. But it did have me. The Kit Carson variant actually just kind of had me wishing we were playing Galaxy Trucker instead, which is of course you know that sort of level of chaotic energy just dialed way up, and you know is designed to be a real time game. And not that I mean, and you know I don't know. Obviously, this has that capacity in it, so it's nice to have that extra variant. But there's so much variance in here. And one thing else it does that I really like, you know, is it gives you a bunch of different combinations of the tiles here that you can use, and it tells you just exactly how this is going to change the way the game is. And I really like that it's done that because it shows you sort of what impact the character tiles have on the game, and it also allows you to sort of tweak the game as well. Like if you're playing with a group of players that are probably more inclined to sort of the Euro building side of things, you can sort of reward that play a little bit more. Or if you want to sort of throw them in the deep end, you can put in the tiles that are reward conflict and player interaction a bit more as well. And you know, it also allows you to just see how you're feeling on any given day, and you know, tailor the game a bit to what you want to be doing. What you've seen me set up here as well is what they're currently selling on the Game Found as the wooden edition. That means that you've got your wooden pieces here for the houses and for the mountains. You can get a cardboard edition where these are cardboard. The cardboard edition also replaces the wooden pistols and horses with cardboard bits as well. Altogether more cardboard, less wood. I think that's a personal decision. I quite like these because they're easier to put out and move around. Whereas when you have all of the cardboard tiles, the one thing that's kind of annoying is the roads. And you can see already that it's a little bit futzy anyway. But when everything's a cardboard tile and you want to put down a new cardboard tile, that's kind of a pain. Whereas like putting down a house or picking up a mountain is much easier. On the other hand, the cardboard looks quite nice when it's all laid out on the board and all the sort of cardboard tiles are fitting in next to each other as well. That looks quite nice. But the cardboard edition is 75 euros. This wooden edition is 95 euros. But they do also come with a really nice new like game trace insert and all this kinds of stuff, so it's quicker and easier to set up. I've got the old cardboard box insert from the original campaign. I think there was a wooden insert you could get at the time as well, but I didn't get it. So I'll go back and get the game trays, I think, in the latest campaign, just because I would like a faster setup. And there's also some nice extras in there as well that you can get. But I think, you know, for 75 for the cardboard edition, I think that's for a big heavy game like this, I think that's a worthwhile price with this much replayability, with this much variation in the box as well. I think the wooden edition at 95 is also well worth it personally. But I really like this game. But again, heavily caveated. I think that fundamentally springing for some of the deluxe stuff on this game is okay, because I think you have to have a group that's going to play this more than once. Like I said, I think at the beginning when you first set out playing this game, there it can be really good fun, especially if you're just sort of getting into the spirit of the Wild West and robbing people and dueling them and stuff. That can be really good fun, and if you care a bit less about whether you win or lose. Um, but I also think this game rewards repeated plays, rewards sort of learning the system, and it's more focused around how that gives you insights into controlling the board state, sabotaging other players, rather than, discovering the strategy and implementing that strategy. I think this is a game where you have to play quite dynamically. But I think that, if you're going to play this game, you ought to try to play it more than once. And if that's going to be the case, then the luxury components, the deluxe pieces are going to get more use, which makes them more worthwhile, which is nice. And I like the big wooden pieces. I like the wooden mountains and all that, the wooden pistols and things. It's satisfying. But even if that's at the very, but it does get quite expensive. So the 75 euro version, I think, is you're getting your money's worth. There's a lot of variability in that box and a lot of different options to play the game and stuff like that. But I just think be careful if you don't have a lot of games in your collection. If you're fairly new to the hobby, this is quite a deep end of the swimming pool kind of game to start getting involved in. Not necessarily because of its complexity. I think it's a 3.18 on BGG, something like that. But because of the way it marries sort of heavy Euro elements to player interactions, that can be quite harsh, especially if you're not used to those kinds of things. But for me, it's a really unique game in my collection that I really enjoy playing, and I'm happy to get to the table anytime. And I love how well it scales at player count. I've actually played it at 2. I forgot I'd played it at 2. It's less good at 2. It definitely becomes a real sort of head-to-head knife fight, and or you can just leave each other alone, and then it just becomes this sort of economic management thing. 2's okay, but I think the game shines at 3 up, and I like how similarly good it is at 3, 4, 5, and 6. So a solid recommend for me. And that's my review of Carson City, a game that I will probably keep forever. So thanks everyone so much for watching. This kind of independent game coverage wouldn't be possible without my patrons on Patreon, who support the show and enable me to bring this kind of content around the games that I like and I want to play to you. So if you want to support the show, you can always go check out the Patreon. That puts you in the Discord, where I'm talking about the games I play and playing games with the patrons and chit-chatting and all that kind of good stuff. And it's a community we'd like to grow, and ideally continue to support the show independently and keep us talking about the games that we want to talk about in the way we want to talk about them. But otherwise, if you can't support the show financially like that, you can always throw a like down on this video, and if you found it useful, tell a friend. Thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.